The rich give trust. Ha, funny word, isn't it? People throw it around like candy. Trust me. Trust the plan. Trust the process. But deep down, nobody really does. Not fully. Not when things start falling apart. Not when the walls close in. Not when life punches you in the teeth and whispers, "Where's your God now?" But here's the twist. There's this line, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart." All your heart. Not the sanitized version, not the Sunday morning smile kind of trust. I'm talking raw, shaking, blood under the nails trust. The kind you cling to when nothing makes sense, when your logic's gone mute, when your plans are in pieces and your prayers sound more like screams. Real trust begins where logic ends. That's the punchline nobody wants to admit. As long as everything makes sense, as long as the puzzle pieces fit and the numbers add up and the path is nicely paved with glowing signs and smiling faces, people say they trust. But that's not trust. That's math. That's management. That's just control dressed up in a church suit. Real trust, oh no, that begins after the map catches fire, after the plan collapses, after life looks you dead in the eyes and says, "Figure this out without instructions." People say trust in the Lord with all your heart like it's a greeting card. Like it's a warm little blanket they can wrap around themselves when things get chilly. But try trusting when nothing works. When your prayers feel like echoes in an empty room. When every logical reason to keep going has packed up and left. That's where trust starts. That's the doorway. Not the easy part, the edge. The fall, the silence that comes right before the scream. Because here's the truth. They don't teach this part. Trust isn't clean. It's not elegant or poetic or neat. It's messy. It's ugly. Standing in the middle of a storm with your arms wide open, bleeding hope and shouting into the dark, "I believe." Even when everything in you is cracking. It's choosing to lean on something you can't touch, can't measure, can't fully understand, while the rest of the world tells you you're insane. See, logic has rules. Logic says, wait for proof. Logic says, don't move until you see the path. But trust says step anyway. Trust says close your eyes and fall forward. And that's what freaks people out, because they love control. Oh, do they love it. They build entire lives around it. Spreadsheets, backup plans, insurances, escape routes. Anything to avoid the feeling of not knowing, but trust dares you to not know, to jump, to risk, to believe in something that doesn't play by your rules. And that's when the panic sets in, because logic is predictable, trust isn't. You can't calculate trust. You can't pin it down or box it up or wrap it in guarantees. You just give it with all your heart, not half, not the safe part, not the Sunday morning version, all of it, the scared parts, the broken parts, the parts still screaming. And that's the deal, isn't it? That's the joke. Real trust requires you to hand over the thing you're most terrified to let go of, control. People nod when you say trust in the Lord. They smile, they hum. They maybe even say amen, but catch them in the middle of collapse, when their logic's run out, when the system's failed, when the floor's been ripped out, and you'll see what they really believe. That's the test. That's the fire. That's where trust walks in, grinning, and asks, "Still with me?" And you either say yes, or you don't. But don't confuse the silence with absence. That's another trick logic plays. If I don't hear anything, if I don't see results, if I don't feel goosebumps, maybe he's not there. Oh no, darling. That silence, that's where trust lives. That's where it grows teeth. It's where it stops being a feeling and becomes a decision. Because trust isn't about proof. It's about posture. It's about surrender, the spine straightening even when the world bends, the breath held in defiance of fear, the whisper that says, "Even now, even this, I still believe." And no, it won't make sense. That's the whole point. If it did, you wouldn't need trust. You'd just follow the instructions like a recipe. But this isn't a recipe. This is war. This is chaos. This is falling through the cracks and still believing the ground will find you. This is the kind of trust that makes the logical part of your brain scream while your soul nods quietly, like it knew the whole time. Because real trust doesn't wait for things to be safe. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't need guarantees. It needs heart. All of it. Even the parts that are breaking. Especially the parts that are breaking. Faith isn't soft. No. It's not some delicate little candle you light when things get cozy. It's not a lullaby you hum to calm the nerves. Faith, real faith, the kind that actually means something, that's survival. That's war paint on your face. That's crawling through fire with blood on your knuckles whispering, "I still trust." People want to paint it pretty, robes, hymns, stained glass windows, and gentle smiles. But strip all that away, and what's left? Grit, teeth, raw belief when everything's screaming, "Give up!" See, people love the idea of faith when it feels good, when the answers come quickly, when the doors open smoothly, when prayers feel like wishes granted on schedule. That kind of faith's easy. That's the cotton candy version. But what about when it's not pretty? What about when nothing works, when the sky stays silent, when every step forward feels like dragging chains through mud? That's when faith shows its real face. Not soft, not sweet, sharp, wild, alive. Faith doesn't show up with a smile. It shows up when your back's against the wall, when the floor's vanished, when the whole world is laughing at you for still believing. It's the decision to keep walking even though the lights are out and you're pretty sure something's breathing in the dark ahead. That's not cute. That's not comforting. That's insane. And that's why it works. Because faith doesn't make sense. It was never meant to make sense. It was meant to break the rules of reason. You think having faith is weak? Try having faith when your prayers go unanswered for years. Try holding on when you've got nothing left to hold. Try believing in a plan when your life looks like a disaster movie on repeat. That's not weakness. That's a level of strength logic can't explain. Faith isn't soft. It's survival in chaos. It's laughing through tears. It's standing in the ruins of your own expectations and still choosing to believe that something beautiful is coming next. People talk about faith like it's an accessory, something you wear on Sundays. But real faith doesn't live in comfort. It lives in chaos. It grows in the wreckage. It feeds on desperation. It thrives in the silence. It's that last thread you cling to when you're dangling over the edge and everyone's telling you to let go. And you almost do. Almost. But something in you, that fire that refuses to die, says no, not yet. Not like this. Faith looks ridiculous until it works. And even then, people still won't understand it. They'll say it was luck. They'll say you were just strong. But deep down, you know. You know what it took to keep going when every cell in your body wanted to quit. When you smiled with tears in your eyes and said, I trust, even though you didn't feel it. That's survival. That's steel in your spine. That's faith with teeth. It doesn't wait for proof. It doesn't ask for signs. It keeps going because it knows. Even if everything says otherwise, even if your own thoughts betray you, faith is louder than doubt. Not because it yells, but because it refuses to leave. It sits with you in the dark. It walks with you through hell. It looks at the storm and doesn't flinch. Not because it isn't scared, but because it remembers who's in control, even when everything seems out of control. You ever seen someone with real faith? Not the polished kind, the kind that's been through the fire. They've got that look in their eye, that strange, calm madness. Like they've faced the storm, danced with the devil, and still walked out whispering, I believe. That's not softness. That's power. That's danger. Because you can't break someone who's already broken and still chose to trust. And no, it doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes it comes with silence, with waiting, with nothing but that invisible thread pulling you forward, and you hold it, even when it burns, even when it cuts, because deep down your spirit knows something your brain never will. Faith isn't some fragile fantasy, it's survival. And sometimes it's the only thing keeping your heart from going completely numb. Trusting fully means surrendering control. And that's where people start to sweat. They love the word trust, sure, sounds noble, sounds spiritual, sounds like something you put in cursive on a coffee mug. But when it comes time to actually let go of the plan, of the timeline, of the illusion that they've got it all figured out, they grip the wheel so tight their knuckles turn white. Because giving up control, that's not just uncomfortable, that's terrifying. See, everybody wants to trust until it requires them to release. They want to keep one hand on the steering wheel while the other one holds a prayer. They want to say, Lord, take the lead, but still carry a backup plan, a safety net, an escape hatch, just in case. Just in case what? Just in case he doesn't show up? Just in case he's not who he says he is? Or maybe just in case he leads you somewhere you didn't approve of? They say, thy will be done, like it's a lullaby. But when that will starts pulling them into the unknown, into the chaos, into the silence where things stop making sense, that's when the fight begins. the panic, the resistance, the bargaining, that desperate little voice that says, can we just go back to the part where I was in charge? But trust doesn't work like that, not the real kind. Real trust demands that you let go of the blueprint, that you stop pretending you know how this all should go. Control is an addiction, a drug. It gives people the illusion of safety. They measure their worth in plans, calendars, 10-year goals, everything neat, everything logical. But faith, real faith, laughs at that. It burns the map. It reroutes the journey. It says, follow me, and doesn't hand you directions. Just a whisper, just a pull, just enough light for the next step and no more. And that's what drives people mad, because they want to see, they want to know, they want to guarantee before they jump. But trust says jump anyway. Close your eyes and fall, not because you understand, not because you're certain, but because something deep in your bones tells you that you're not in charge. And that's exactly how it's supposed to be. That's where surrender begins, when you finally drop the illusion, when you stop trying to control the outcome, the people, the future, and just say, I'm done pretending. Lead me. And oh, it hurts. Don't let anyone tell you surrender is easy. It rips you apart, 'cause control is tied to ego, to pride, to that voice that says, I know best. So when you surrender, that voice gets quieter, weaker, until it's just a whisper in the corner, watching your faith take the wheel. And sometimes that faith takes you through storms, through silence, through places that don't make sense, but still you go. Not because you're fearless, but because you finally accepted that your control was never real to begin with. People like to think they're the authors of their own story. But if that were true, why does life keep rewriting the pages without asking first? Why do the plot twists come uninvited? Why does the chapter you thought would last forever get torn in half overnight? You're not the author. You never were. You're the character. You're the one learning, growing, breaking, healing. The pen isn't in your hand. It never was. And when you trust fully, you stop trying to snatch it back. But most people, they keep reaching, keep scribbling, keep editing what they don't like, until finally they hit the wall. The part of the story that makes no sense. The moment where all the logic falls apart. And that's where the real decision shows up. Do you keep fighting for control that was never yours? Or do you surrender to something bigger, something wiser, something that doesn't always explain itself but knows exactly what it's doing? Trusting fully isn't passive. It's not giving up. It's not floating along in la-la land. It's choosing, actively choosing to release your grip on the illusion. It's opening your hands and saying, even if this breaks me, even if I don't understand, I still believe. You're leading. That's not weakness. That's war. That's battle. That's handing over the crown and stepping into something far beyond your control, and somehow far more secure than anything you could have built yourself. Doubt screams louder when you're closest to breakthrough. That's not just a coincidence, that's strategy. That's the final play of fear before everything changes. It waits until the last second, right before the shift, right before the miracle, right before the door swings open. And then it starts yelling. Loud, unrelenting, sharp little voices in your head saying things like, "This is stupid, you're not ready, turn back." And most people, they listen, not because it's true, but because it sounds familiar. Doubt doesn't walk in early. It waits. It lurks in the corner while you're dreaming, while you're planning, while you're preparing. But once you get close, once the heat rises and you can almost feel the change coming, that's when it pounces. It's the mind's last defense against growth, because deep down, your old self knows it can't survive what's coming next, and so it fights. It screams. It throws every ugly, anxious thought it can at you, in hopes that you'll crawl back into the familiar, back into the numb, back into the cage. It's like clockwork. Things finally start aligning, the vision gets clearer, the path opens up, and then, boom, here comes the inner chaos. Sleepless nights, random panic, overthinking. You start second-guessing what you know is right. You start looking for reasons to stop, to slow down, to delay. But it's not because the path changed. It's because you're too close to becoming someone your past can't manipulate anymore. And that makes doubt panic. See, breakthrough isn't quiet. It doesn't arrive gently. It shows up like a storm, and before it hits, everything around you starts shaking. You'll see relationships crack, plans get messy, emotions spiral, and in the middle of all that, doubt slides in and tries to convince you that all of this chaos means you're on the wrong path. But really, it's proof you're on the right one. People mistake resistance for red lights. They think discomfort means turn back. But resistance shows up when you're pushing against something heavy enough to matter. If it was easy, doubt wouldn't need to show up. But because this next step threatens everything that's kept you stuck, it unleashes the fool army. Every insecurity, every failure, every lie you told yourself at 2 a.m., they all come rushing in like some kind of final boss before the next level. And here's the kicker. Doubt doesn't come in sounding like a villain. No, it talks like a friend, a concerned voice. It says things like, "Are you sure this is God? What if you're wrong? What if this all falls apart? Sounds reasonable, right?" But that's the trap. Doubt wears the mask of logic. But real logic doesn't throw noise into your peace. Just because you're about to leap, that's not reason. That's sabotage. You think breakthrough is all glory and light and trumpet sounds? No. It's messy. It's terrifying. It's filled with moments where you have to walk forward while your mind begs you to turn around. It's full of tension, pressure, that unbearable heaviness that tells you something is about to break or be born. And in that tension, doubt does its dance. Because it knows if you take just one more step, everything changes. And change is terrifying, even good change. Even freedom, that's what nobody tells you. People think they're afraid of failure. No, they're afraid of becoming someone unrecognizable, someone fearless, someone unstoppable. And doubt banks on that fear. It whispers, who will you be if this actually works? And that's the moment you start hesitating, not because the dream is too big, but because your old identity starts crumbling and you don't know what's on the other side. Do you ever wonder why everything feels hardest right before the breakthrough? That's not bad timing. That's the threshold. That's the spiritual battleground. That's where faith becomes a weapon, not a comfort. Where you have to make the choice, listen to the noise or trust the knowing. Because deep down, you already know. You can feel it, that pull, that push, that fire that refuses to die, even when the doubt screams louder than ever. And the louder the doubt gets, the clearer the signal becomes. Because doubt only screams when you're getting too close to truth, too close to purpose, too close to becoming who you actually are. Partial trust is just disguised fear. That's the trick most people play on themselves. They say they trust, oh yes, they say it with a straight face, hands folded, head tilted like they mean it. But behind the scenes, they're still calculating, still double-checking the exits, still holding the strings, just in case the whole trust in the Lord thing doesn't pan out. They don't call it fear, though. No. They call it wisdom, discernment, being realistic. But underneath all the fancy language, it's just fear wearing a nice suit and smiling politely. You can't trust halfway. That's like jumping off a cliff and keeping one foot on the ledge. Doesn't work. You either let go or you don't. And people don't want to hear that. They want options. They want a plan B. They want to follow God as long as it makes sense, as long as it feels safe, as long as He doesn't start asking for the things they're not ready to give up. They'll trust with their words, but not with their wallet. With their Sunday, but not with their Monday. With their prayers, but not their plans. And it's not because they're bad people. No, it's because fear is subtle. It doesn't kick the door down. It creeps in through the cracks. It whispers, sure, go ahead and trust, but keep your backup plan. Keep that relationship. Keep that job you hate just in case. Keep that mask, that habit, that lie you tell yourself so you don't have to leap. It tells you to trust just enough to look faithful, but not enough to lose control. People think fear looks like panic, like shaking hands and sleepless nights. But sometimes fear looks like being overly cautious, like stalling, like sitting still and calling it waiting on God, when really you're just too scared to move. You don't want to call it fear because fear makes you feel weak, so you rebrand it. You call it strategy. But deep down you know you're hedging your bets. You know you're holding something back. And here's where it gets messy. God doesn't work with half-trust. He doesn't build on shaky ground. He doesn't share the throne. So when you say, I trust you, but your actions say, I've still got the wheel, you create a gap between what you say and what you live. And that gap is where frustration festers. That's where prayers feel unanswered. That's where peace disappears. Because you're still trying to run the show, but calling it obedience. It's like asking for a miracle, then drafting a contingency plan in case He doesn't come through. You want the waters to part, but you're also packing a boat just in case. And it sounds smart, doesn't it? Sounds responsible. But faith was never supposed to make sense. That's the whole point. You don't need faith if you've got a guarantee. You don't need trust if you've still got the reins. You ever wonder why it feels like nothing's moving, why the door's still closed, the breakthrough still on pause? Maybe it's not because he's not listening. Maybe it's because you haven't fully let go. Maybe the thing holding you back isn't the enemy or the circumstance. It's the fear you haven't named yet. The one hiding under your logic. The one you dressed up as wisdom because it's easier to say, I'm being careful, than I'm afraid. And don't get it twisted. Fear doesn't mean you're faithless. It just means you're human. But if you don't confront it, it'll drive, it'll shape every decision you make. It'll lead you in circles while you call it God's timing. And deep down you'll know. You'll feel that tension between who you are and who you're called to be. That stretch, that itch, that gap that never goes away. That's what partial trust creates. Distance between your potential and your reality. And that distance, it only closes when you do the scary thing, the thing that makes no sense, the thing that puts your comfort on the line. That's where full trust lives. Not in safety, but in surrender. Not in knowing, but in letting go of the need to know. Because real trust isn't about being fearless. It's about showing faith even when fear is screaming. It's about showing up with empty hands and saying, I've got nothing left but belief, and that has to be enough.